My name is Johannes Wessely. I'm a senior scientist at the Department of Botany and Biodiversity, and my main field of expertise is modeling future distributions of species with a main focus on climate change and plant species.
My name is Bernd Lenzner. I'm a senior scientist at the Department of Botany and Biodiversity, and my main field of expertise is understanding global environmental change drivers and their effect on biodiversity and society, particularly biological invasions. In this video, we will give you an introduction into global biodiversity dynamics. To start us off, we would like to ask you the following questions. How many species do you think are currently threatened with extinction? Watching this video, you will learn what that number means for the current state of biodiversity and subsequently for us humans. We will give you an overview of the major threats as well as about proposed solutions for the biodiversity crisis.
The term biodiversity is quite abstract. However, it can be broken down in a set of easy-to-understand facets. Under biodiversity, or biological diversity, we understand the variability of all living organisms across all terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. This includes the diversity within species, called genetic diversity, across species, called species diversity, and across all ecosystems, called ecosystem diversity. When we talk about biodiversity, most often people talk about species. So here we are also going to focus on species diversity to show you global trends, but keep in mind that the other facets, genetic and ecosystem diversity, follow similar patterns. While species diversity is quite well understood, we actually still don't know how many species exist worldwide. Conservative projections estimate around 8 to 12 million living species, excluding archaea and bacteria, but only 10 to 15% are known to science. However, this knowledge is biased across taxonomic groups. For example, we know most of the vertebrates and plants, but little about fungi and invertebrate diversity. These species are the building blocks of our ecosystems and their functions. However, as you now know, at least 1 million of these species are directly threatened with extinctions in the future. But given that so many species exist, does even a large number as 1 million species threatened really make a difference? That is indeed a good question. In the past, we have seen already many extinctions, and so far our ecosystems seem to be mostly intact. But this might change rapidly. You can think of biodiversity as a house of cards. We can take out some cards and the house still remains standing. We take out some more and maybe some sections of our house drop. But if we keep removing cards, at some point the entire house collapses. In a similar way, you can think of biodiversity. If we remove individual species, their functions in the system get lost, but maybe other species can compensate for that. For example, you can remove quite some pollinators from the ecosystem, as we have done over the last decades, but flowers still get pollinated. Put differently, high biodiversity introduces redundancy in functions in the system and increases its resilience. However, when too many species are lost, the entire ecosystem might collapse and we lose all its functions. Once again, we could ask the question, why should we bother? Well, in fact, we depend more on nature than you might think. There are many contributions of nature to people. These can be material ones, such as supply with food, energy, medicine, or other resources. They can also be regulating, such as regulation of air and water quality, soil formation and protection, or climate regulation. And they can, of course, also be non-material, for example, for recreation, cultural practices, or inspiration for art and technological design, just to name a few. As you see, biodiversity is important for us humans and affects all dimensions of our life. In order to protect biodiversity, we have to understand why it is declining and who or what is responsible.
Actually, it is us, humans. Especially since the mid-19th century, we have changed the surface of the Earth dramatically. Human population has increased exponentially, energy consumption is going up, transport and tourism has intensified, and much more. This, of course, has implications for the Earth system. Carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere are spiking, resulting in increased climate change, ocean acidification, and terrestrial biosphere degradation. A process that has been coined the Great Acceleration. All these anthropogenic activities put more and more pressure on the biosphere. To understand how species are affected by these pressures, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, constructs so-called red list assessments. These identify species threat levels globally and the main causes for these. Based on these red lists, a set of major drivers of biodiversity loss has been identified, namely land and sea use change, direct exploitation of populations, climate change, as well as pollution and the introduction of invasive alien species. As an interim conclusion, we can say that the state of biodiversity is not good, with overall trends continuing to decline. So the question remains, what can we do to bend the curve of biodiversity loss towards a future where biodiversity loss is halted or even reversed? Future scenarios, like the one you see here, show that if we are increasing conservation efforts coupled with a more sustainable production and consumption, we might turn the current negative trends around. At the global scale, the community of nations has formulated a set of ambitious goals and targets outlining ways on how to stop biodiversity loss, the so-called Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or KMGBF. The KMGBF proposes the global vision of a world living in harmony with nature by 2050, formulating in total 23 targets on how to achieve this. One main target, for example, is the so-called 30 by 30 target that aims at conserving and managing at least 30% of terrestrial, aquatic, and marine areas worldwide as protected areas. Another more human-focused one is about restoring, maintaining, and enhancing nature's contributions to people through conserving ecosystem functions and services for the benefit of all people and nature. With the adoption of these global targets, countries commit to take actions nationally. Those are formulated in individual national biodiversity strategy and action plans. At the European level, this is done through the European Biodiversity Strategy, including the European Green Deal, and in Austria by the Austrian Biodiversity Strategy.
In the beginning, we asked you why we should care about the loss of biodiversity, indicating that 1 million species are currently estimated to be at risk of extinction. We hope that you have learned that biodiversity is one of the fundamental building blocks of life on Earth and a cornerstone for healthy and resilient ecosystems.
Global efforts like the global biodiversity targets and the national implementation are essential to bend the curve of biodiversity loss in order to turn the negative biodiversity trends around and ensure a positive future for biodiversity and society.